Welcome to Blue is Live. I'm your host, Tanner Blue. Thank you guys so much for joining me today on this episode. We got a lot of stuff to talk about. We've got our Super Bowl matchup. It's going to be the Philadelphia Eagles versus the Kansas City Chiefs. We're going to break down both games, the Philadelphia Eagles versus the 49ers, and then the Chiefs versus the Bengals. What went right, what went wrong, and everything in between. Look at all the squads that are going to the Super Bowl and all the squads that are going home and what they can do to advance. Plus, we've got all kinds of reaction towards the game, what we're going to look forward towards in the Super Bowl, or the matchups that we have there, and a couple other things in between that happen as well, especially Tony Romo, a big conversation piece, and then also looking at the NFL refs not having the best showing for themselves. So let's get right into it. We will start with the first game we had on tap, what was the 49ers and the Philadelphia Eagles. Eagles win this one pretty convincing in a score of 31-7. Now, if you look at the box score, you would think, wow, the 49ers got absolutely massacred, outmatched, outplayed, which was true to an extent, but big caveat there. The 49ers were down to another string of quarterback. Brock Purdy gets hurt. We now found out that he has a sprained or a torn UCL. I believe that's what the injury is. I believe that's something in the elbow or the throwing motion that really affects that. Because when he came back in the game for Josh Johnson, who was the backup, who was then out of the game for an injury because he had a concussion. When Brock Purdy came back in, I believe he threw one pass, and I think that pass was for maybe just a few yards. It wasn't many, and essentially they became one-dimensional, and that was the story of this game. You had the Philadelphia Eagles, who in my opinion were the best team in the NFC, and then you also had the 49ers, who were the second best team in my opinion, but with no quarterback, there's not much you can do. And a lot of people were, yes, Brock Purdy's been really good since he's came in. The kid's been undefeated. He's played some good football. I think he had 14 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. He was undefeated as a starter. He was playing some good football. Granted, he's in a really good system, got some great playmakers around him. Christian McCaffrey, Deebo Samuel, George Kittle, Brandon Ayuk. I mean, you got a bunch of good guys there. So he was put in a very good system. Kyle Shanahan, a really good play caller for the most part. And, he was able to give it a run there, and he got his 49ers all the way to the NFC Championship game. And it's just unfortunate to see the injury happen. A lot of people were questioning his toughness. He had the sprained UCL. I would like to see how many people could go out there with that and try to give it a go at the quarterback position. So tough break for him. He did some nice things this year, and he certainly inserted himself into the conversation to be starting quarterback for the 49ers. We'll discuss that in a little bit. But, tough year for the Niners, or a tough end to the year for the Niners for such a good year that they had. Probably the best defense in the NFL. But there wasn't much they can do, and I don't want to take too much credit away from the Eagles, because the Eagles, while they can't control who they're playing against, they can just control how well they play, and they certainly did that. Jalen Hurts, it's neck and neck between him and Mahomes for the MVP race. I'm going to give the edge to Mahomes just a little bit, and we'll talk more about that. But Jalen Hurts had a nice game. And the whole Eagles defense, man, I mean, they got some guys. They got some really good guys on that side of the ball. There's just no real weaknesses on this Eagle team. I mean, you've got great quarterback play, a quarterback that is playing at an MVP level. You've got a great ground attack. You've got arguably 2 number ones. It could be. I mean, I would say A.J. Brown's a 1. I would say Devontae Smith's a really, really good number 2, maybe a fringe 1. And then you've got a fantastic offensive line with Kelsey and some of those guys. And, I mean, the defensive line is stacked. You got guys in the secondary. And this Eagles team, they're young. They've got a lot of draft picks, a lot of good draft picks coming up in this next year's draft. A lot of high picks for them, being such a great team. I mean, it's a lot to look forward to. So, shout out to the Eagles. They've had a fantastic year. They didn't, crumble as the best team. A lot of these teams, they're the number 1 seed sometimes, and they come in here with their, they're up here, then they get into a tough playoff matchup, and then they're out. Not this year. Eagles make it to the Super Bowl as they should because they're the best team in the NFC all season long. So congratulations to them. Now let's get back to the 49ers because I think this is the interesting part. So obviously the quarterback carousel, that is a huge thing of concern going into next season because let's take a look at this. 49ers have really 4 options at quarterback. They could stick with Brock Purdy, which reports were saying before going into this game that that's what they were likely going to do. Now, we'll see if that is true. You got Brock Purdy, who's on a really cheap contract. You've got Trey Lance, the guy they moved up to get in the draft, the guy that they thought was the next piece to take the 49ers all the way. Because think about it. Because going into this season and last season, the 49ers have always been a team with one of the best rosters in the league, but they've just been a quarterback away. Jimmy Garoppolo, he got them there. He's done some nice things, but he's not sustainable at that. He's not sustainable at that position to do it for that long. Plus, he's been really injury prone. So they were just looking for that guy, that superstar quarterback. And they thought they had him in Trey Lance. And it's not over on Trey Lance. It is not over. Guy played 2 games this year, and he got hurt. He was out for the year. So you got Brock Purdy, you got Trey Lance. You got to figure out what you're going to do with that because really he was the guy that you were crowning to be the franchise quarterback. You got Jimmy Garoppolo, who we know what he can do. There's some good there, and then there's some not so good, but he's capable. He's a capable quarterback, and there are lots of other teams that would probably want his services next year if he's not the guy. And then we have the conversation that has been going around, Tom Brady going to the 49ers, the hometown kid going to San Francisco. There's only so many options for Brady. I don't think he's coming back to Tampa Bay, and I don't think he's going to retire. So that's 2 options that are eliminated. It really comes down to, Miami, which I think they want to roll with Tua. And then you also have the Josh McDaniels situation. But, he would pair with Josh McDaniels, but, the Raiders are still not even going to be competitive in the AFC with a 45-year-old Tom Brady, I don't think. There's too many other good teams. And, there's so many variables, it's tough to say, but that is an option for the 49ers. A lot of people say, hey, you get Tom Brady, you're going to win the Super Bowl next year. You're back in it. So there's so many options for this team to go. Now, in my opinion, what would I do? It's tough. First off, I want to say that when you go into this offseason, if you have a chance to get Brady, I think that's certainly an option you can explore. But if you do that, I would be prepared for trade offers for either Brock Purdy or Trey Lance. Now, this is a tough decision. I'm not ready to give up on Trey Lance. Personally, I'm not, because I was a fan of him coming out. I thought, yes, he needed time, but, I think it's too early to say. Similar with Jordan Love. I like Trey Lance more, but I think it's too tough to say at this moment. And then you got to look at Brock Purdy. He did a lot of nice things. Now, is that a benefit of the system that he's in? Maybe that now they've got tape on this guy, a full offseason. Let's say he comes back as the starter. Is he going to get figured out? I guess you could say. Because, we've seen guys come in and they've played a couple games really, really well. And then, they kind of get figured out a little bit. They get tape on them. And they're not what they were for those couple games that they played. It's a really tough situation. Either way, if they go with Brady, I think it's a 1 or 2 year thing. I think it's a 1 year thing. Personally, I wouldn't do that. I think you've got 2 young guys that you believe in. I don't think you need to go that route, but I know it's very enticing to do so. So let's say you do go with Brady. Now you've got, I would say you probably keep Brock Purdy as a backup. Then you've got Trey Lance. You could offer him as a trade piece possibly in Jimmy Garoppolo. So, this is a tough decision for 49ers. I would say it's a good problem to have. Most teams are just trying to have one good quarterback. Meanwhile, they've got 4 guys that are capable of being, starters to Hall of Fame quarterbacks. So it's really tough. And, it's certainly not a bad situation to be in, but it's certainly one that, you'd hate to be John Lynch and the coaching staff, Kyle Shanahan, the guy that's got to make this decision, because you make the wrong one. That's tough, knowing that you had those guys on your roster. But, hey, I'd rather be in that position than not be in it. So we'll see what the 49ers do. A big offseason for them in terms of the quarterback. The rest of the roster is pretty much solidified. I'm sure they've got free agents. I need to look at that list, guys to re-sign. But John Lynch has done a fantastic job, assembling that team. They got Christian McCaffrey in the trade. He was healthy the whole time he's been there. So that's good to see from them. And shout out to the Eagles. They made it to the Super Bowl. 49ers going to be right back there in the mix next year, likely. But can they get the quarterback situation figured out? Obviously not their fault that they got hurt, or Brock Purdy got hurt, but we'll see what they do. Now on to the next game. There were a lot of things to talk about here. This was certainly the more entertaining game, obviously, because there was 2 healthy-ish quarterbacks playing in this game. We'll start with the the winners of this game. Kansas City Chiefs. Let's start with Patrick Mahomes, actually. Patrick Mahomes, we know the story. We've heard it. The ankle, it's bummed. It's hurt. It's going to be tough. Kid comes out. He plays a pretty good game on a bum ankle. Over 320 passing yards, 2 touchdowns. He makes a couple Patrick Mahomes-esque plays where he's flipping the ball and he's doing the thing. And then we obviously have the run at the end of the game where he really didn't run the whole game because he really couldn't. And then he gets that first down to kind of extend the drive. He gets pushed out of bounds, 15-yard penalty, and sets him up for the game-winning kick. Also, Pacheco doing a nice job as well on the ground, mixing it up with the run and the pass. He's a really nice player. And Travis Kelce, he's Travis Kelce, one of the best tight ends of all time. 7 grabs, 78 yards, a touchdown. And the defense played really, really well. Chris Jones, man. Chris Jones did a phenomenal job. I think he had 2 sacks in this game. Frank Clark had 1.5 sacks. That Chiefs defensive line is really underrated. So their defense has really stepped it up this year from years past where it's been primarily offense. Can the defense stop anybody? They've done a nice job. Steve Spagnuolo done a nice job there with the defense. So they played a very solid game all around. Now on to the Bengals. The Bengals, I was very torn between this game because of my predictions. If you go back and take a look at my predictions, a lot of them were wrong. But 2 things I have gotten right was the Chiefs getting back to the Super Bowl and Patrick Mahomes winning the MVP. Now, we don't know if Mahomes is going to win the MVP. I think he will, but we'll see. But I did get 2 of those things right. So the Chiefs are back in it. But part of me was torn. I really wanted to see the Chiefs win because I want to see Mahomes get another Super Bowl or get back to a Super Bowl. But I also wanted to see the Bengals get back after losing last year and being such a young team and having a chance to go to back-to-back Super Bowls and have a chance to redeem themselves. Joe Burrow, man, I'm a fan of Joe Burrow. I really am. I think he is a top 10 quarterback, no doubt. He just has it. He can make perfect throws. He's extremely accurate, and I love his demeanor, his big game demeanor. He just has it, if you know what I mean. He just has it. But I gotta be honest, Joe Burrow in this game, he really struggled. Now, I will be honest, the offensive line was bad. He got sacked a lot. I think in the first quarter he was sacked 3 times. I mean, it reminded me of 2 years ago when their offensive line was horrible, and he was out with ACL injury. And the offensive line certainly did him no favors. Yes, there were some injuries on that offensive line, but they did not help. And Bro threw 2 picks. And one of them, it was a really bizarre read where he just kind of threw the ball up to, I believe it was to T. Higgins. And it just didn't really matter. I don't know if he didn't see the guy there, but it was a bad throw and it was intercepted. He didn't have a ton on the ground either. Joe Mixon and Perine had 22 yards rushing. Joe Mixon, 19 yards. Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. T. Higgins had a pretty solid game. Jamar Chase, 6 grabs, 75 yards. The defense was good enough to stop Mahomes and to only keep them to 23 points, I think, is a win. But I got to give credit to the Chiefs defense. They really wreaked havoc on Joe Burrow and that offensive line. And that's what they had to do to win this football game, to stop them down. Because they've got weapons, and they were able to do that. And Joe Burrow did not have his best game yesterday. And that is unfortunate, especially in the NFC Championship game. So I think it was a mix of Joe Burrow not playing his best football and that Chiefs defense really stepping up to the plate and doing a phenomenal job. And Patrick Mahomes making the crucial play, even though he wasn't 100% healthy, making the crucial play when he needed to make it. Now, this brings me on to my next point. There has been a lot of talk. If you've been on Twitter today, last night, anytime in between, one of the top trending topics on Twitter is NFL rigged. Hashtag NFL rigged. Now, this is interesting because officiating has been at an all-time low across sports in all categories the past couple years, especially football. Now, I've never been an official. I've never cared to be an official. In fact, I've often said that I would never want to be a referee because you pretty much just get yelled and screamed at all the time. It's very rare for people to come up to an official or something. You did a phenomenal job calling this game. You made all the right calls. Thank you. It's very more often you're going to hear, hey, you did a terrible job officiating this game and you made all the wrong calls. You made all the wrong calls. And that's it's a tough gig, man. It really is. And, listen, I'm a fan, okay? I'm a fan. I try to analyze the game, fandom aside, as best as I can. But, being a fan, it's something that just happens where, the refs missed this call. They missed that. How did they see this? How did they not see that? This is the worst officiating I've ever seen. I mean, that's just something that happens when you become a fan. You notice every single thing. It's maybe not going right for your team all the time. But the level of NFL officiating has been really bad this year and years past, but this year really bad. People were going on Twitter. They had videos of, blocks in the backs on punts, punt returns, holding calls, roughing the passer. And, it's tough because I'm not trying to defend the officials because I'm really not, because I think they've really done a bad job all year long. I really do. But it's also a tough gig. Understand it. But, when you get to a certain level of a game, AFC Championship, playoffs, Super Bowl, when you have people not necessarily talking about how good of a game, how close of a game, how this one play, oh, did you see that play where this happened? This was a deciding factor. When you have people saying the deciding factor was the refs, that's bad. And I'm not talking about, oh, you're just complaining because your team lost and you didn't get the calls. That's one thing. But another thing is to, even for people that aren't fans of either team, such as myself, seeing the bad and the missed calls constantly, it's really tough to watch. And that's why you have, the conception that the NFL is rigged. There's script writers. There's, am I going to say the NFL is rigged? I'm not. But it is interesting. It is interesting, some of these calls that are missed all the time. I think it's more a thing of just bad officiating. There's no consistency. That's the problem, is there's no consistency across the league in calls. If there was a consistent line of rules that were called and penalties, and I think if the NFL understood it, the fans understood it, and the players understood it, you would have a more put together and cohesive understanding of the rules and what to expect. But you don't. You see, excuse me, what you have is, should we call this? Yes, maybe. Okay, I'm going to call it this time. Oh, I'm not going to call it that time. And I think one of the prime examples is this year, the roughing the passer. Roughing the passer was the worst I've ever seen in my entire life. I understand wanting to protect the quarterback. I really do. I get it. Because quarterbacks make the game go round, and you want to try to protect them if they are defenseless. Okay. There were some really bad calls this year where defensive linemen, it's almost like, what can they do? What can they do? And, they can barely touch a guy. And what are they supposed to do? If they barely touch the guy after the ball's thrown, if they grab him and they try to let up, there's so much to try to do in the midst of a game. That's the last thing you're thinking of. And to have players have to think about that in the back of their mind while they're playing. Now, if it's a completely egregious after the play call, then yeah, I understand. But to have some of these calls that were made were terrible. Now, for an example, I was at the Panthers Week 1 game against the Cleveland Browns, where Brian Burns got called for a roughing the passer penalty after it was on the last drive where the Browns drove down the field and kicked the game-winning field goal. And Panthers had played bad all game, but they had a chance to win this game. And this kick drove them all the way down there. The Browns ended up winning it, and it was a absolutely horrible roughing the passer call. I think Burns had his hand. Brian Burns, who made the play, got the penalty. He kind of had his hands near the shoulder pad of Jacoby Brissett, and they called that roughing the passer. He never even got him in the helmet or the face mask. It was just close to the area. They got him for a roughing the passer call. 15 yards, first down, they drive down. It does tend to feel very script-like in a lot of these situations, where another one, pass interference, especially on the defensive side, defensive pass interference. Listen, I'm not an NFL quarterback. I played corner in middle school and high school. It is tough. I would be willing to say that other than quarterback, playing corner is the toughest position to play. Especially now, because it is so hard to guard and defend a receiver in the pass in his trajectory across the field and not make any sort of contact without drawing a flag. Listen, there are a lot of times where DBs do get a little handsy and they tend to grab and they rough. And I think a lot of that is penalty worthy. But there are so many times where it is the ball is hitting the receiver at the same time that the DB is trying to knock the ball down, and they will automatically call a flag. There is just no consistency. It's very tough. It's really tough. And it's a shame, because when you get to these high-level games, you don't want to look back on, this call here, this call there, this changed the game. Because I do think tonight I think that the Chiefs were the better team. They were. I think they really were. Joe Burrow did not have his best game tonight. The offensive line for the Bengals was not good. Chiefs did everything they needed to do to put themselves in a chance to win the game. But there were certainly some calls that were not favorable to the Bengals and some missed calls, and this is what we end up with. So here is my idea. I think the NFL, they're very good at not talking about things that come up sometimes. But, I know NFL refs are not full-time for the most part, and I could be wrong. Let me know if I'm wrong. I think for the most part they are not. I don't know if there are any full-time refs. In a game this big, in a league this popular that makes this much money, they should have full-time referees. They should. They should have full-time referees that in the off-season, they go back and they watch film on controversial calls, and they go back and they watch tape. And I'm sure they probably do this at certain, points in the off-season, or, whatever referees are doing. But there should be a fully dedicated, as if players have training for the offseason, refs should have training for the offseason. Because if you really want to make this right, you have to get more training and you've got to look back and see where you were wrong. And I'm talking we need full-time refs all the time that are being trained, going back and watching film, analyzing what they got wrong, what they got right. Just as if a player goes back to watch film and wants to take a look at what he did right and what he did wrong and how he can get better. The refs need to do the same exact thing. And I think the NFL really should look at that issue and take it seriously, because NFL refs are a mockery right now. And across sports, refs are mockeries right now. And I think with the advantages of technology and camera angles and things have really helped, but we're still getting stuff wrong all the time and missing, and it's very unfortunate. So, what are you going to do? What are you going to do, NFL? I think you have to address this and do something, some sort of change. People talked about finding referees. I don't necessarily think that's, a bad move. I think it's a tough thing to implement, but I do think that, while there are players and coaches that if they constantly don't do their jobs correct, they could be traded, they could be cut, they could be benched, they could be not on the team anymore. Such things as coaches, they'll be fired. If you go to your job and you constantly mess up and you miss things, you're going to get reprimanded a couple times. But eventually this keeps happening. There's a good chance you might get fired. In the NFL, we have people miss stuff all the time. Refs usually have no accountability. And they'll just come out and say, hey, I'm sorry, we missed a couple calls, and then that's it. There's no ref post-game conference to maybe explain some of the controversial calls. I don't really know what the right answer is. I think the best you can do is have full-time refs and maybe institute some sort of fine or penalization for them constantly missing things. But it's really tough. And I think this is something the NFL really needs to address, because if they don't, we're going to keep getting the same thing we're getting, and it's not good. It's not good at all. And that's not just in the NFL. That's across sports in general. So, lots of stuff to look forward to there. But back to the game, I think that the Chiefs were the better team. I think that's why they're going back to the Super Bowl. Joe Burrow made a couple mistakes here. Mahomes, it wasn't perfect, but he got the job done. And that defensive line was great as well. So we got the Bengals and the Chiefs. Excuse me, this brings me back to one more point that I have to make regarding this game. I mentioned it earlier. Tony Romo has gotten a lot of criticism for his broadcasting style over this past year. Now, let me take you back a couple years ago. For me, that's what I've always wanted to do as my profession, is to be a broadcaster. A color commentator, play-by-play, either one is fine with me. When Tony Romo first got on the scene, it was like a breath of fresh air. I mean, it was amazing. Everybody loved Tony Romo. His type of commentary was new. It was innovative. He was a former quarterback who was, for the most part, a pretty good quarterback. He would analyze things before they happened, and you would see it happen. You would get his insights about what a team might do or why they might do this. And some of his catchphrases and his quirkiness was not annoying. It added to the game. I mean, there were times where I've never really been the biggest fan of CBS broadcasts. I've always been a little bit bigger fan of Fox and NBC. But when a CBS game came on and Tony Romo was calling it, I kind of got a little excited. I was like, okay, I am enticed to watch this game a little bit more because of Tony Romo calling the game. Fast forward to this year into now. I started to notice that, And this is before I really looked into what other people thought about this. This is just my own personal opinion. I'd watch Romo and I'd listen to him, and I was like, he's doing the same thing he's been doing, but not at the level that he was. It came more as he's just saying things just to maybe say them, and you get the really, interesting and different sound effects where it's like, oh, Jim, I don't know, man, here we go. We got to see how it works out. He did that when he first started, but it came off in a way where it was, man, he's really got me on the edge of my seat. I want to listen to what he has to say. I want to see this play. Where now, for some reason, it's kind of coming across as, man, I kind of wish he would just stop talking and let the play unfold. And I kind of noticed it a little bit this year, and I was like, maybe he's just having an off game. He's not hitting his cues the way he was, 1 or 2 seasons ago when he came on the scene. So, that kind of hurt some people who are not maybe his biggest fans. And there are some commentators that I'm not the biggest fan of, and there's some that I am. Personally, for me, my favorite commentator in the game has always been Mike Tirico. I think he's done the best job. I think overall he does a phenomenal job of calling the game, storytelling, his emotions and his voice when something happens. I've always enjoyed Mike Tirico. I really liked him and John Gruden on Monday Night Football. That was one of my favorites, and I enjoy him on Sunday Night Football as well. Now, last night, a lot of people were talking about Tony Romo, and not necessarily in the best way. A lot of people are very frustrated with his style of commentary. People saying, he's making strange noises like I did earlier with the, oh, Jim, I don't know, we got to see how it happens. Oh, man. Or we've got the Patrick Mahomes. A lot of people saying, man, he is just really, really a fan of Patrick Mahomes. Patrick Mahomes, he's on a messed up ankle, but he's doing great. Patrick Mahomes, that ankle's messed up. People were, really frustrated with him saying that. And then also a lot of people just saying that he's not necessarily letting the plays breathe, not letting the action just unfold on the field without, injecting his voice and his commentary into the game. Instead of letting the play unfold, trying to make it unfold before we see it in a way. And, it's tough. Commentary is tough. I used to do it for, my college, UNC Charlotte, where I attended. I used to do commentary on the radio for men's and women's basketball games. It's tough. It's a tough job to do, but it's amazing. It's super fun. But, you got to have a balance. And I don't think it's over for Romo. I don't think he's going to get fired or anything like that. But I think he certainly has to come back and redeem himself a bit, maybe next year. I know a lot of people are kind of frustrated with his style of commentary when in the beginning everybody was really for it. A lot of people right now are big fans of Greg Olsen. I think Olsen does a really nice job. He does a nice job of breaking down things that, you wouldn't see normally. And not necessarily things you wouldn't see normally, but things you just wouldn't think of. He sort of knows what's going to happen beforehand, but he does a really good job of explaining why that's happening on the field. And I think he's doing a nice job of that. Now, we all know that Tom Brady, whenever he decides to hang it up, has got a guaranteed gig at this moment to go to Fox, call some games. A lot of people don't want to see him get the boot whenever Brady comes, but, we'll see whenever that happens because Tom Brady never wants to retire. So I just thought that was an interesting piece of information. A lot of people are talking about it. And I want to do a video in the future, probably after the Super Bowl, looking at commentary teams, which ones I think are the best, the worst, how they can improve, things that I like. Because that's an aspect of the game I've always enjoyed. And that's why I wanted to be in, sports media and journalism and, one day sports commentary, because I like that aspect of watching a broadcast. So Chiefs, Eagles, Super Bowl in Arizona. It's going to be a great game. I truly think we got the two best teams in the NFL, one on the AFC, one in the NFC. Who's going to win? Well, I'm not going to tell you now because it's too early. I got to make another video about it. But looking at this matchup that we have now, I think this is really intriguing. You've got a team like the Chiefs. They've got the best quarterback in football, in my opinion. They've got the best tight end in football, in my opinion. And they've got a much better defense than they've had in years past, making the Super Bowl. Looking at the Bengals. I keep saying Bengals. Looking at the Eagles. They've got the most complete roster in the NFL. No weaknesses across the board of that team. They are certified A, B talent across the board. Can they beat the Chiefs? Can they dethrone the new generational quarterback? The guy that's supposed to be the new greatest of all time one day. Stop him from getting his second Super Bowl. Can Jalen Hurts become the guy? He's playing at an MVP level. Do they have enough to stop the legend of Patrick Mahomes that is essentially growing across the NFL? It's going to be an interesting matchup to see, to say the least. I can't wait to watch this game. We're going to have more analysis breaking it down, what's going to happen with the weeks coming up. But thank you guys so much for tuning in to Blues Live. Hope you guys enjoyed the episode of my takes on the AFC, NFC Championships, and everything that happened in between the game. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next episode.